Kyoto, Japan, late spring 1969. The training hall is quiet in a way that feels deliberate. Tatami mats are aligned edge to edge, their seams straight, their surface worn flat by decades of repetition. Along one wall, three men sit cross-legged, backs straight, eyes forward. No one speaks. A wall clock ticks, each second clean and separate. At the center of the room stands Bruce Lee, invited to demonstrate, not to test. He has been in the building less than 10 minutes. Shoes removed, jacket folded, space measured with a glance. The air is warm, but unmoving. Across from him is an Okinawan Karateka, known locally for one fact only. He has not been beaten. No record, no disputes, no need to explain himself. He does not step forward. He does not bow first. The distance between them is just under 2 meters. Close enough to matter, far enough to wait. No challenge has been spoken yet, but everyone present understands why the room has gone silent. The invitation was formal, brief, and specific. A demonstration, not a match. A visit, not a test. By late spring of 1969, Bruce Lee had received many such requests across Asia, but this one differed in tone. The dojo was not commercial. It did not advertise. Its name carried weight locally without needing explanation. Attendance would be limited. Observation would be quiet. Lee arrived shortly before midday. The exterior gave little away: wooden frame, sliding doors, no signage facing the street. Inside, the space opened into a rectangular training hall measuring roughly 12 meters long and 8 meters wide. Tatami mats covered the floor wall to wall. The room was clean but not new. Corners showed where feet had pivoted for years. A single calligraphy scroll hung on the far wall, centered, unadorned. He removed his shoes at the threshold and stepped onto the mat in socks, then barefoot. His jacket was folded once and placed near the entrance. No one spoke. 3 observers were already seated along the left wall, each separated by about 1 meter. Their posture was upright, hands resting on thighs, eyes level. None acknowledged him directly. The senior instructor entered from a side corridor and nodded once. No bow was requested, but Lee bowed regardless, controlled. Brief, no flourish. The nod was returned. This exchange established the rules more clearly than words could have. Respect was expected. Deviation would be noticed. Lee was guided to the center of the room. The distance from the far wall was measured instinctively, about 3 meters behind him, 5 meters in front. Enough space to move, but not enough to drift. The ceiling was low by modern standards, forcing awareness of vertical limits. Light entered through narrow windows set high along the right wall, creating long shadows across the mat. The purpose of the visit was restated quietly: a technical demonstration, footwork, distance, interception. No sparring had been scheduled. No opponent had been named. The senior instructor stepped back 2 paces and sat. The observers adjusted slightly, closing the semicircle by less than half a meter. The room felt smaller. Lee stood alone for several seconds. He did not begin immediately. His eyes moved once around the perimeter: left wall, far wall, right wall, entrance. He noted the exits, one behind him, one to his right, both narrow, both controlled by proximity. He shifted his stance subtly, feet shoulder width, weight neutral. His hands remained relaxed at chest height. At that moment, another presence became unavoidable. Across the room, near the far wall, a man stood who had not entered with the others. He was already there, barefoot, wearing a plain white gi without markings. His belt was darkened with age. He stood slightly off-center, about 2 meters from the wall, arms at his sides. He did not sit when the instructor sat. No introduction was made. The observers did not look at Lee now. Their attention angled toward this man, though no heads turned fully. The shift was smallest than 10 degrees but unanimous. Authority in the room adjusted without announcement. The senior instructor said nothing. The demonstration had not yet begun, but its conditions had changed. The distance between Lee and the standing karateka was approximately 2 meters. close enough that any movement would be immediately consequential, far enough that stillness remained an option. Seconds passed. The wall clock marked them cleanly. 10 seconds. Then 20. The silence was not empty. It carried expectation, restraint, and a question no one voiced. Lee remained still. He did not advance. He did not speak. He waited, understanding that the invitation had already fulfilled its purpose. The demonstration was no longer the reason everyone was there. The man across the room did not move. He remained standing as the instructor stayed seated, an inversion that carried meaning inside a traditional dojo. His age was difficult to place older than Bruce Lee by at least a decade, but without visible stiffness. His stance was neutral, feet parallel, weight evenly distributed. Nothing about his posture suggested preparation. Nothing suggested hesitation either. No name was given. None was required. Among the three seated observers, one adjusted his position, sliding back several inches to clear his line of sight. Another leaned forward slightly, elbows still off his knees. These were not gestures of curiosity. They were practical adjustments, the kind made when something unscheduled becomes possible. The senior instructor glanced once at the standing karateka, then returned his eyes to the center of the room. He did not intervene. That choice mattered. In this space, permission was often granted by absence rather than command. Bruce Lee registered the change immediately. The distance between himself and the karateka, just under 2 meters, was now the defining feature of the room. No one else occupied the space between them. The exits he had noted earlier were no longer abstract. The door behind him sat roughly 4 meters away. The side corridor was closer but partially blocked by seated witnesses. The standing man's reputation was understood by everyone present. He had trained in Okinawa before relocating to the mainland. His visits to this dojo were infrequent but respected. Over the previous decade, he had faced visiting practitioners from multiple styles: karate, judo, Chinese systems, always privately, always without spectators beyond senior members. No formal records existed, but the results were consistent. No losses, no disputes. This was not legend spoken aloud. It was treated as operational knowledge. Bruce Lee did not challenge the assumption. He did not acknowledge it either. His breathing remained even. His hands stayed relaxed. He made one adjustment, shifting his lead foot back by approximately 5 centimeters, reducing his profile without signaling retreat. It was a preparatory change, not a defensive one. Silence extended again. 30 seconds passed. The instructor did not prompt the demonstration to begin. The karateka did not step forward. The observers waited, aware that the first movement, any movement, would redefine the visit. At 40 seconds, the karateka raised his chin slightly. Not a nod, just enough to bring Bruce Lee fully into his line of sight. His eyes did not narrow. His shoulders did not rise. The gesture carried no aggression, but it closed the last ambiguity in the room. This was no longer a demonstration with a witness present. It was an encounter with conditions. Bruce Lee remained still. He did not initiate. He did not fill the silence. By waiting, he confirmed something the room had begun to suspect. Whatever happened next would not be framed as a challenge from him. The observers understood this as well. One shifted again, this time moving his knees back from the mat's edge. Space tightened by less than a meter, but the effect was immediate. The training hall felt smaller, more focused, as if its purpose had narrowed. Nothing irreversible had occurred yet, but the structure that prevented it was thinning. The silence no longer functioned as neutrality. It had become pressure. The standing karateka took one step forward. The movement was controlled and economical, covering approximately 40 centimeters. He stopped with his feet aligned, shoulders square. The distance between him and Bruce Lee reduced to roughly 1.5 meters, close enough that reaction time mattered. Too close for explanation. No words accompanied the step. In a traditional dojo, such a movement carried weight. It was not a strike, it was not a bow, it was a claim of space. The senior instructor did not rise. His stillness confirmed that the step would not be corrected. One of the seated observers exhaled audibly, then corrected his breathing. Another shifted backward again. Heels now touching the wall. The semicircle tightened, reducing the open mat area by nearly a meter. The exits were now functionally irrelevant. Anyone leaving would have to pass between the two men. Bruce Lee adjusted his stance by degrees, not steps. His rear heel lifted slightly, weight redistributing forward. His hands rose no higher than before. The change was subtle, but deliberate. It shortened his response time without signaling intent. The karateka's gaze dropped briefly to Lee's center line, then to his lead foot. The assessment lasted less than 2 seconds. When his eyes returned to Lee's face, the decision had already been made. This was no longer about demonstration etiquette or visiting protocol. Time extended again. 15 seconds, then 20. The wall clock continued its steady rhythm. Each tick registered clearly in the room, unmasked by conversation or movement. At the 30-second mark, the karateka shifted his weight forward. Not a step, just a transfer, front foot accepting load, rear foot lightening. The change reduced his reaction window but committed nothing. It was the kind of adjustment that forced a response without technically initiating contact. This was the provocation. Under the rules of the space, Bruce Lee could not ignore it indefinitely. To remain still now would allow the other man to dictate range completely. To step back would concede authority. To strike first would violate the unspoken frame already forming around him. Lee chose none of those options. Instead, he made a micro-adjustment, sliding his lead foot laterally by approximately 5 centimeters, altering the line between their centers. It was not retreat. It was not advance. It changed the geometry of the encounter without escalating it. The observers noticed. One leaned forward involuntarily, then stopped himself. The instructor's eyes narrowed slightly, not in concern but in focus. The karateka registered the shift immediately. His shoulders rotated a fraction to compensate. The distance between them remained unchanged, but the balance of control had moved. The room understood this instinctively. The conditions for a neutral demonstration no longer existed. Whatever happened next would not be attributed to misunderstanding or cultural difference. It would be judged on outcome alone. The silence returned, heavier now, compressed by proximity and choice. Nothing irreversible had happened yet, but the moment where it could be avoided was passing. The karateka moved first, but not forward. His lead foot shifted inward by less than 10 centimeters, a corrective adjustment meant to reassert centerline control. It was a technical choice, subtle and efficient, designed to close options rather than create them. In that instant, his weight committed forward just enough to matter. Bruce Lee responded immediately. The interval between movements was under 1 second. There was no preparatory motion, no visible loading of the shoulders or hips. Lee's rear foot drove lightly off the mat, closing the remaining distance approximately 1.5 meters in a single step. His hands did not rise. They traveled straight. The contact occurred at chest level. One action. Compressed. Final. Lee's forward structure met the karateka's partially committed weight at the exact moment his balance was transitioning. The result was not a strike in the conventional sense. It was a disruption. The karateka's upper body moved backward while his base failed to follow. His heels lifted. His center passed behind his feet. The entire exchange lasted less than 2 seconds. The karateka fell backward, his shoulder contacting the mat first, followed by his back. The sound was flat and unmistakable. He did not roll. He did not recover to standing. He remained where he landed, arms momentarily outstretched, eyes open. No further movement followed. Bruce Lee did not pursue. He stopped immediately after contact, standing just over a meter away. His posture remained upright, his hands lowered. The space between them reopened, but the situation had already changed permanently. The observers did not speak. One shifted backward instinctively, pressing against the wall. Another froze mid-movement, then settled. The senior instructor stood at last, slowly, without urgency. The wall clock marked the moment precisely. 58 seconds had passed since the karateka's final weight shift. The dojo was silent again, but it was no longer waiting. For several seconds, no one moved. The karateka remained on the mat, breathing steady but shallow. He did not attempt to rise. One knee bent slightly, then settled. The fall had not injured him, but it had displaced him completely physically and structurally. In a dojo where balance equaled authority, the distinction mattered. The senior instructor crossed the mat at an unhurried pace, covering the distance in 4 measured steps. He stopped just short of the fallen man, looking down without alarm. After a brief assessment, no more than 3 seconds, he nodded once. Not in approval, in acknowledgement that the moment was finished. Only then did Bruce Lee move. He stepped back half a meter, restoring formal distance, his hands lowered fully to his sides. His breathing remained unchanged. There was no adjustment to stance, no attempt to reclaim the center. He had already relinquished it. The karateka sat up slowly, supporting himself with one hand on the mat. He did not look at Lee immediately. When he did, the look was brief and level. There was no visible anger, no denial, only recalibration. None of the observers spoke. One shifted his legs to the side, breaking the semicircle. Another straightened his jacket. These were not reactions to spectacle. They were administrative movements, signaling closure. The senior instructor addressed the room quietly. The words were few and procedural. The demonstration, he said, would not continue. No explanation followed. None was requested. Lee bowed once short, controlled, precise. The karateka returned the bow from a seated position. The exchange lasted less than 2 seconds. It was sufficient. The wall clock continued. 1 minute passed, then another. Conversation did not resume. The dojo returned to stillness, but the earlier tension did not return. What remained instead was clarity. Roles had been redefined without dispute. The visit had reached its conclusion without escalation, without commentary, and without record. When Lee retrieved his jacket, no one stopped him. When he stepped back through the doorway, the mat space remained undisturbed. No one followed. Outside, the street noise resumed immediately, unchanged. Inside, the room did not discuss what had happened. It did not need to. No report was filed. No entry was added to a logbook. The dojo did not alter its schedule, and the incident was not mentioned in instruction that followed. By design, nothing about the encounter was formalized. In spaces governed by tradition, silence often functions as documentation. The karateka resumed standing within several minutes. He tested his balance once, shifting weight from heel to forefoot, then settled. Training did not restart. Instead, the instructor dismissed the room early, an unusual decision that required no explanation. The observers departed individually, separated by minutes, avoiding conversation as they left. In the days that followed, nothing changed on the surface. The dojo continued as before. The karateka returned weeks later, training without comment. No rematch was suggested. None was necessary. The conditions that had produced the encounter could not be recreated without effort, and no one made that effort. What endured was the consistency of retelling. Among senior practitioners, the account remained spare and precise. Time was measured in seconds, distance was recalled in meters. The movement was described the same way each time: brief, centered, conclusive. No embellishment entered the narrative because embellishment would have weakened it. The power of the story rested on how little there was to add. Outside the dojo, the incident circulated unevenly. Some heard of it years later, through second-hand connections, often stripped of names and dates. Others never heard it at all. There was no photograph, no recording, no corroborating document. The absence of evidence did not dilute the account. It preserved it. For Bruce Lee, the encounter did not become a public reference point. It did not alter his trajectory or require explanation. It existed alongside other moments, private, controlled, resolved without audience. The memory persisted because it resisted spectacle. In that restraint, it found durability.